So, do we begin?
Yes,
Hmm.
sir. It should say that we are live now, so we'll probably give it a minute.
Hmm.
Yes, sir. It says that we are live on
Hmm.
YouTube now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to all of you who are joining us from various parts of the world for another Karma special lecture. My name is Chandani Jaswal, and it is an honor to introduce the speaker for tonight's session. Professor Prabhat Kumar Basant is a historian specializing in ancient Indian history and urbanism. He's a professor in the Department of History and Culture at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, and was a visiting professor at the University of North Carolina. He received the Fulbright Nehru Academic and Professional Excellence Fellowship in 2018 and the Indian History Congress Prize in 2015 for his book, The City and the Country in Early India. Professor Basant's research focuses on early Indian urbanization, archaeology, and historical texts. He has authored several books, including the NCRT textbooks, and published extensively in academic journals and edited volumes. His writings also appear in newspapers like the Indian Express and the Hindu Business Line. Today, Professor Basant will be sharing his insights on the topic mapping the Manavadharmashastra and the discovery of Madhyadesha. Please welcome Professor Basant. Professor Basant would be speaking for about 45 minutes, and that would be followed by a 15-minute Q&A session. You may type your questions into the YouTube live chat, and I would be reading those out to Sir. Without further ado, for the moment that we've been waiting for, I now hand it over to Professor Basant. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandni. It's a great honor to be here and sharing my views and ideas about certain issues which we normally do not touch upon. Uh, but this lecture is more in the form of uh, search, as it were, where I'm kind of trying to involve all of you to ask questions about your own selves, in a certain sense, creation of ourselves as quote unquote Brahmanized Hindus, as it were. So it's as much of a attempt to make generalizations and provide you certain kinds of information as it is about the possibilities of research that exist in history as such. Uh, I'm going to talk about what might be called production of space. This is a term that has been popularized by some French geographers, and so far, the way we understand geography, we try to think that geography essentially consists of a study of mountains and rivers and plateaus, etc., etc. But there is something like a felt space, meaning that lots of things that we imagine about our spaces makes it our space, as it were, as such. For a very simple, one can take a very simple example that if there is a street which we pass by every day, and maybe at one corner there is a dog which is quite hostile to you, uh, it probably would like to bite you a little, nibble at you maybe, then the meaning of that street changes at that point. We start expecting something bad to happen at that point of time and space as such. So, in a certain sense, human beings create a space for themselves. And it's in that context that I came across this idea of what is called the Madhyadesha, the middle country, roughly translated. Now, communities all over the world have this notion that they are located in the center of the universe, as it were, as such. For example, China, the name that the Chinese give to themselves, they call themselves Chungko, which literally means middle kingdom. So they also believe that they are located in the middle of the world, as it were. And this is not something exclusive to India or China. A very large number of communities have this kind of a feeling. So we are going to explore some of those things about how the Manavadharmashastra or Manusmriti, the text that we know about, talks about such a notion in the context of the Indian subcontinent. The third thing that I intend to do is to, try and think about this whole issue in the longer durée fashion, meaning that I believe that uh, the waves of the past, they wash us right to our knees even today. Even today we are involved with a lot of ideas that might have been created 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, and we knowingly or unknowingly following many of those things as such. You can understand this idea by, when we talk about what is called cultural geography. You can think of the recently held Mahakumbh. Now, for a non-believer or for a person who is not from the Indian subcontinent, it's simply a place where two rivers merge or three rivers merge, as it were, as such. But for a believing Hindu, it's the place where he can wash away or she can wash away all her sins. Now, what as we need to do as historians is to try and understand the worldview of the believers as well as the non-believers. Because only if we are able to understand those worldviews can we understand the possibilities that exist in such a belief, as it were, as such. So these will be the three things that I intend to handle for today's lecture. Now, the first thing that I had in mind was to, you have how Manavadharmashastra or Manusmriti, a text that was created somewhere around 200 BC to 200 AD. It's believed to be have been you know not done by one author, but it was composed in these 400 years as such. How it's kind of visualizes the idea of space. Like all influential books, it has a vision about the whole universe, how the universe was created, and then gradually it kind of shifts its focus to smaller units, smaller chunks of space. And it's very important for us because this becomes the vision of classical Brahmanical way of visualizing space, as it were. Now, so Manu was, in a certain sense, involved in the production of space as such. And we will try and see how that idea of production of space is very interesting. And it provides us lots of insights about our own selves as such. Now, in Manu's world, the purest segment of the universe was an area which was called Brahmavarta. Let me see if I can show you the map of that. This is the area which is located between the Saraswati and Drishadvati rivers, somewhere close to the area bordering Haryana and Punjab, area of what is called Kurukshetra. You can see names of places like Thaneshwar, Pehowa, Kaithal, etc., which were part of this. This was supposed to be the purest segment of land anywhere in the world as such, because this was the region, this was the area where gods performed all kinds of yagyas, all kinds of rituals, so that the universe could function properly. Now, it says very clearly that there is this, I quote, the conduct handed down from generation to generation among social classes and the intermediate classes of that land is called the conduct of good people. So everyone who stays in this area of Brahmavarta is supposed to be of the purest kind, and he sets role models for rest of the world. And now the second ring of purity in this understanding is the area which is called Brahmarshidesh, the land of the Brahmin seers as such. This is the area which is defined, in their shlokas as the area which is believed to be, which covers the areas of Kurukshetra, Matsya, Panchala, and Shurasenaka. Uh, Now, it also borders the Brahmavarta area, so it will probably cover the areas of Mathura, cover the areas of modern day Kurukshetra, Meerut, etc., and of course the earlier ring of pure land as such. And this is followed by the third ring of purity, which is called Madhyadesh. And it says the land between the Himalayas and the Vindhya ranges to the east of Venasana and west of Prayag is known as the middle region. हिमवद्विन्ध्योर्मध्ये यत प्राग्विनशनादपि प्रत्यगेव प्रयागाच्च मध्यः देशः प्रकीर्तितः. That's the very, very famous shloka from Manu, Manavadharmashastra as such. Now, what is interesting for us is that this definition excluded places east of Allahabad from its ambit, which means that eastern Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Bengal were not considered part of Madhya Desh. Thus, cities like Varanasi, Ayodhya, Vaishali, or Patliputra were believed to be located beyond Madhya Desh as such. Now, that created some problem for the Buddhist tradition because, as you know, the important things that happened in the life of Buddha, Buddha's birth, Buddha's attainment of knowledge, Buddha's first sermon, and Buddha's Mahaparinirvan all take place in areas which are present day eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. None of those places will fall in the Madhyadesha category. So the Buddhist tradition invented the idea of what is called Madhyamadesha, and they said that these areas are also part of the Madhyadesh, meaning that the idea of Madhyadesh was also being pushed in one direction or other, but the Brahmanical tradition holds firm in the minds of the people who belong to the Brahman system as such. Now, Madhya Desh itself was located in the Aryavarta. Aryavart, the classic definition of Aryavart that's given in the Manusmriti is that uh, Asamudrat Vaipurvat, Asamudrat Paschimat, Tayorevantarah Giryo Aryavartam Vidurbudha, meaning that from the ocean to the east to the ocean in the west, and the area that is between the Himalayas and Vindhyas is the area of Aryavart, the area where the Aryans stay, meaning that the whole of Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka would be considered beyond the pale of Aryavart as such. Uh, there will be many other areas. So what we discover is that there are these units of division: Brahmavarta, Brahmarshidesha, Madhyadesha, Aryavart, and that is surrounded by Mlecchadesha, the area of the barbarians. Now, this fivefold division seems to have a curious similarity with the Varna system, but I haven't really done any research on this. So possibly one of you in future might locate why these parallels really matter as such. Now, in fact, Manu very clearly says that the Aryans, the twice born, should never cross the boundaries of Aryavarta. They should never go beyond the areas that fall between Himalayas and the Vindhyas. So anything across the Vindhyas is something that is a no-no. It's a barbarian land, and no well-meaning Aryan should ever cross those boundaries as such. In fact, there were some discussion among experts of the Brahmanical tradition after the 7th, 8th century whether there is any way that one can move beyond the boundaries of Aryavart. And we know from history that people were moving from the boundaries of Aryavart all through various periods of our past as such. But we have to also ask this question, which is uh, what was so special about Madhyadesha that Manu was so partial to it? Why was he, saying that this is the pure land, people should live there, and the conduct of people in these lands are the conduct of people that should be, copied by people of rest of the world. There is this very famous shloka, Etad desa prasutasya sakasha dagra janmanah swam swam charitram siksheranam prithivyam sarvamanavaha. The Brahmins born in this area, which is the area of what can be called Brahmarshi Desh or Madhya Desh, their way of living, that is something that should be copied by people all over the world as such. Now, this was something that we have to figure out what were the cultural practices of people of this area that were supposed to be, making them special, at least in the eyes of the Brahmanical tradition as such. Now, we don't have very clear ideas about this thing, but if we look at the text carefully, look at Manavadharmashastra and other Dharmashastra texts carefully, we do come across, some idea, make some, we can make some generalizations about these people. One of the things that they very clearly say is that the people of this area speak a better language. Their language is the purest. As many of you know, that the Brahmanical tradition was very particular about the purity of language, about how to pronounce each word very, very carefully, correctly as such. I'm sure many of you know the story of the battle between Vritrasura and um, Indra. Vritrasura was the king of the demons, and Indra was the king of gods, and there was this eternal battle going on between these two sets. And Vritrasura unfortunately used to lose every war that he fought. And then he goes to his guru, Shukracharya, and he says, is there anything that we can do so that we can win the war? And the story is that he said, okay, you perform these rituals and then you have to utter these words, which says, Indra Shatru Varadhasva, which will mean kill the enemy Indra. Vritrasur performs the yagya very well, but Vritrasur being a demon and probably he didn't know how to pronounce things correctly, so he instead of saying Indra Shatru Vardhasva, he says Indra Shatru Vardhasva, which the meaning changed and it became one whose enemy is Indra, kill him. And so at the end of that sacrifice, poor Vritrasur himself is killed as such. So you have any number of examples in the Brahmin tradition where this chastity of language, to be able to speak the pure word was considered very, very important. So that was one thing that was very important. And you have texts like the Shatapatha Brahman, which say that the language of the inhabitants of the Kuru Panchala area uh, is the purest in the world. But apart from that, there are many other things that that are important when we are talking about good conduct. That probably meant following the rules of caste and observation of various rituals. By the same logic, we can assume that those who didn't live in the middle country, spoke crude languages, didn't follow the rules of caste, nor performed Brahmanical rituals. Now, let's try and get inside a Brahmanical settlement of Madhya Desh. What will be the structure of that settlement. What are the inhabitants of that settlement doing? And probably the most central thing for any Janapad would be the household. So, what kind of household was being visualized by Manu? You have this very famous sentence from Bodhayana, which says, "A sharp-tongued woman should be divorced immediately." Now, obviously, all these Brahmanical traditions were very particular about trying to create a patriarchy and trying one of the things that was part of that tradition was to create submissive women. And so you have the idea of a grihapati who has control over production and reproduction of the household. So, it has been pointed out that in the Vedic tradition, you had several words for household. You had griha, also had terms like dampati, where probably the man and woman had equal rights. Whereas grihapati, you don't have a term like grihapatni. Grihapati was the sole master of that particular um, uh, space as such. You can also see that there is this overwhelming concern for marriage practices that would avoid pratiloma marriage, marriages where the caste of the woman is higher and the man is lower, or for that matter, uh, there are a lot of statements about what women should be like as such. And as I said, that all those words literally, look down upon women. Like there are these very famous sentences that it's in the very nature of women to corrupt men. Similarly, there are a variety of marriage practices that are mentioned in the Manu Smriti, where they say that the Brahma Vivaha is the right kind of marriage. It mentions other kinds of marriages, but the ideal marriage is the Brahma Vivaha, where the father gives kanyadan, gives his daughter to another householder. It becomes an exchange between two householders where the woman has no voice. Now let's see how, if we move out of the household and come out in the street, in the settlement, what are the things that are being pointed out that are happening in the invented social space? Now, there is this quote from Apastambha which says, "A Brahman should beg, placing Madam at the beginning, Kshatriya placing Madam in the middle, and Vaishya placing Madam at the end." Now, the very utterance of these Sanskrit words by which you beg are supposed to betray your caste in the social space. And there are many more examples that we come across. There was an attempt to create a channel for the flow of power, as it were. And also it's done in a way where the odds differ in such a hierarchical fashion that those who are subdued are not even able to realize that this is something that probably goes against them. They also become upholders of that system. It's like someone has pointed out that American children often confuse the president, policeman, and the father with the benign state, as it were, as such. Now, what we wear, how we talk, the directions which we face while urinating or defecating, all these things are mentioned in the Manusmriti. You can locate them, but I find these examples from the linguistic space quite interesting. Like, for example, there is this quotation from Shatapath Brahman, which says, "Now there are four different forms of this call, viz come hither in the case of Brahmin. Ehi is the word that should be used for if you are calling a Brahmin towards you. Agahi, approach, in the case of Kshatriya. Adrava, come quickly in the case of Vaishya. And uh, Adhava, come running in the case of a Shudra. So, although each word is meant to call an individual, but depending on the caste of that person, the word becomes come running and please come over. Similarly, you have this example again from Shatpat Brahman, where it's mentioned, I quote, let him not, the person who is conducting sacrifice, it's about him, let him not commune with everyone, for he who is consecrated draws nigh to the gods and becomes one of the deities. Now, the gods do not commune with everyone, but only with a Brahmin or a Rajanya or a Vaishya, for these are able to sacrifice. Should there be occasions for him to converse with a Shudra, let him say to one of those, tell this one so and so, tell this one so and so. So he is not supposed to talk to Shudra when he is part of the ritual space. As he pointed out, the brahmacharis of different castes who are not only supposed to use different words for begging, they are also expected to don different clothes and different kinds of staffs when they are going. But more than that, there is also a prescription about the names that people should be given. It says the name of a priest should have a word for auspiciousness. Of a ruler, it should be denoting strength. Of a commoner, um, it should be property. The name of a Shudra should breed disgust. So you can see that in the social space, people are being defined by the language that they speak. People are being defined by the way they are being called, by the ritual space, by the way they dress. And Manu was inventing these distinctions so that the one could easily identify the castes of the pure and relatively impure as such. But what is even more interesting, that even the forms of greeting, the way we greet each other, are being defined in the Manavadharmashastra. It says, I quote, with joined hands, let a Brahmin greet by stretching his hands level with his ears, a Kshatriya level with his chest, a Vaishya level with his waist, and a Shudra very low. So even the forms of greeting are defined according to caste. When returning the greeting of a person belonging to one of the higher classes, the last syllable of his name should be lengthened three more. Means it will mean Basanta. That is how it should be, called as such. So similarly, the moment, which means that the moment the name of a person is announced, it kind of betrays his caste, his status, and in a certain sense, Homo hierarchicus announces his presence not only by the dress he wears, but also by the gestures of his body and by the intonations and emphasis involved in articulating the words in a sentence. Uh, then it goes on. When he, this is again from Apastamba, when he meets the teacher after sunrise, however, he should clasp his feet. At all other times, he should exchange greetings, although according to some, he should embrace the teacher's feet even at other times. In the presence of his teacher, moreover, he should speak while lying down. To his mother and father, he should show the same obedience as to his teacher. A student who has returned home should clasp the feet of all his elders. Uh, so you can see that the passages that I have quoted, they create a grammar of gestures that defined what can be called proper conduct, a conduct which was followed by the people of Madhyadesh, and a conduct that kind of drills inferiority in age and status over and over again as such. Uh, Similarly, there is this rule of precedence on road. I quote, a man in a carriage or one who has entered his 10th decade, a man who is ill or carrying a burden, a woman, a Vedic graduate, a king, and a bridegroom must be given right of way. Of these, if they meet, the Vedic graduate and the king should represent the most, and of the king and Vedic graduate, the Vedic graduate should receive the respect of the king. So, the dumb charade that's being played out in the social space is meant to, tell everyone who is what. What I find also interesting is that when they are defining social space, somehow on the road, women are not mentioned. I have no idea why that happens. But the self that is presented in everyday life was constructed to the specifications of Dharmashastra traditions. Uh, uh, Now, whether these prescriptions had any validity in day-to-day life of people of Madhyadesh is something that we need to, examine further. Uh, Uh, and that is something that I wish to cover. Fashian and Shenchang, these Xuanchang who came to India, they very clearly mention the fact that the Chandalas lived outside the city near cremation grounds. The location of Chandalas on the periphery of cities was the result of a set of decisions taken by the ruling minority located in the city. It was a deliberate location or relocation within a space defined by the powerful. It was not as if there was a shortage of space in city. Rather, the presence of certain number of people outside the boundaries of the city reflects the spatial projection of control exercised by the powerful. Now, there are these other aspects which I find quite interesting. The famous writer James Scott discussed the idea of what has been called backstage resistance by the weak. The idea of a space removed from the prying eyes of the powerful that escapes the eyes of the powerful, that escapes the eyes of the powerful. This hidden transcript consists of slander, gossip, and character assassination. Such forms of cautious resistance, hiding behind anonymity, aimed at self-preservation, are part of a cat and mouse game played by the powerful and the powerless. The ruling class would try to pry open these spaces and find out what's going on among the people. One could ask whether the ruling class had any strategy about it against character assassination or gossip. The Dharma Sutra tradition created its strategy by a contemptuous rejection of the mode of life of the other. The othering was invented by emphasis on the idea of Sankirna Jati, terrible food habits, swapacha, meaning dog eaters, uh, torn, impure clothing, lack of generosity, and wrong speech. Uh, Now, they were also the reach of these prescriptions prize open spaces unthought of in modern law. So, there are prescriptions and punishments against verbal assault, sitting at the same seat as the man of superior caste, spitting, and even breaking wind are punishable offenses. Now, for Chandalas, there is a very clear prescription where they should be staying. It says Chandalas should live near mounds, trees, and cremation grounds. The dwellings of the Chandalas and Swapachas should be outside the village. They must use discarded bowls and dogs and donkeys. Donkey should be their wealth. Their clothing should be the clothes of the dead, and their food should be in broken dishes. Their ornaments should be made of black iron. Now, I think I'm running short of time, so I'll try to hasten a little. Uh, Now, what is important is that even in today's Madhyadesh area, the grammar of most marriages and most of the politics that goes on there is played by the ideas of caste system and various ideas that were mentioned in these Dharmashastra texts as such. To that extent, we can say that many of the ideas mentioned there are still part of our day-to-day experience. For example, I mentioned that Dalit characters are supposed to have names which are supposed to breed disgust. Now, look at the novels of Premchand or stories of Premchand. The Dalit characters have names like Dukhya, meaning sorrow, Ghisu, meaning one who scrubs, and Gobar, cow dung. Even the popular Bollywood film Lagan names its Dalit character as Kachra, meaning garbage. Now, I was wondering whether these were just chance occurrences, so I looked up uh, the autobiography of this very good Dalit writer, Tulsi Ram. Now, he mentions the names of his grandparents as Juthan and Musaria, meaning that uh, what was being prescribed by Manu has been followed till very recently in our societies as such. And what is even more interesting is that if you look at the pattern of atrocities against Dalit in modern India, the largest number of atrocities happen in the area which is called the Brahmavart area. The purest land has this strange association with largest number of Dalits, atrocities on Dalits. This is, saying that on the basis of map, which is officially available, made by people who have culled information from government data as such. And the highest, concentration of atrocities on Dalits again happens in the cow belt. Similarly, we realize that the middle country has the highest rate of killings for dowry. Again, this is a map which was made by government organizations, which show that the highest number of dowry deaths take place in the cowbelt areas, and there is even more interesting is that some people, anthropologists and geographers, who worked on the location of Dalit people around various localities of North India. They found, at least in the case of Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Haryana, that Dalit households are generally located to the south of the main settlement, outside the main settlements, and to the south. Now, they tried to find out whether the local people had any explanation why the settlements of Dalits were located to the south. And some of the people said that they are located to the south because the god of death, god Yama, lives in the south. So if he were to visit the village, he will be striking the households of the Dalits first, only then he will come to other households as such. Now, similarly, there are these even more startling figures, which is that if you look at the rural or unorganized workers in India today, about 80% of them belong to SC, ST, and OBC categories. This is based on studies done by uh, Arjun Sen Gupta in 2007, which was a study which was done again at the behest of the government of India. So these are figures provided by the grammatical by the government. So I'm not making up these things. So uh, what is even more interesting as I'm moving to the modern times, what I find more interesting is that one of the arguments given in favor of Hindi was that it was originally called Kauravi, meaning the language of the Kuru people as such. And as such, it was believed to be a pure language of the Aryans. In fact, Mahavir Prasad Dwivedi, the great Hindi writer, called Hindi the daughter of Sanskrit and the elder sister of Indo-Aryan languages. The historical self-consciousness of Hindi as the language of the Aryans and the social uh, model it implied became part of the Sanskritization package that spawned conservative ideologies in North India. Now, there are even more interesting things where this idea of Brahmins of Madhyadesh being purist took very, very grotesque forms as such, For example, uh, we have a very large number of inscriptions and literary evidences that from the 4th, 5th century to definitely till about 18th, 19th centuries, Brahmins from Madhyadesh were migrating to different parts of the Indian subcontinent. It's a lot of work has been done about Bengal, and what is very strange is that in the case of Bengal, the Brahmins of Madhyadesh were called Kuleen Brahmins, since would marry the women of lower Brahmin status families in Bengal so that their children would have higher Brahmin status. So these Brahmins made it into a profession. Brahmins would make, there are any number of stories by Sharat Chandra and many other references to that, that a Brahmin would marry hundreds of Brahmin women, will stay there for a year or two or month or two and then move to the next village and so go on reproducing high status Brahmins, which also meant that if one Brahmin died, because they started getting married by the time they were 14 or 15 and kept getting married till they virtually till the time of their death. So if one Brahmin died, it will mean that hundreds of Brahmin women will become widows. And this was connected with the issue of sati and connected with the issue of what to do with widows, which became the foundations of movements of modernity in Bengal, where these issues were considered very, very central. Now, similarly, we can see that in the area of Nepal, there has been certain amount of agitation by a group of people who call themselves Madhesi, Madhyadeshi, people who have come from Madhyadesh, and they have retained those identities. So, to for which has been transformed into political agitation. What is even more surprising, some years back, a newspaper piece carried, on prison abuse in India, where the person who had done a lot of work on prisons in Bengal, she said that in a Bengal prison, a Brahmin was less likely to be tortured than a Dalit. Now, this was stunning thing to say that in a place like prison, where laws don't seem to function, at least in India, suddenly even there, the the warders, the prisoners, everyone has certain notions of what is right and what is wrong, and they are trying to follow that thing. Now, with all these things, I have tried to map the ephemeral geography of ideas. It showed that the arc of imagined pure spaces expanded in the last 2000 years. Frontiers moved with the whims of history. Few remember Madhyadesh today. However, many of the things, like Brahmavat is forgotten. However, the many of the prescriptions that were attached to the idea of Madhyadesh seem to animate the lives of most cowbelt Hindus and many other people in South Asia. I think I'll stop here. I have taken 5 minutes more than I should have, and then wait for your responses to various issues that I have tried to raise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Basant, for this very important lecture on a part of our history that is deeply being contested and debated and discussed, especially in this century of the world that we are in this century of times that we are living in. So, thank you very much for your scholarship. I had a few questions of my own, but in the interest of time, we have several questions in the chat box. So, we'll get started with the questions that the audience has shared with us. And dear audience, we can see that you've loved the lecture. Please do consider sharing your comments and leaving subscribing to our channel and leaving your likes and all that you need to do on YouTube to keep the work that we're doing sustained. So thank you very much again, audience, for joining us. And over to the questions now, sir. So many people have thanked you for the lecture, including Professor Deshpande, and they've praised the lecture. But coming to the questions, Sneha Ganguly has shared three questions. She says, thank you, Professor Basant, for such an important intervention in the discussion of Brahminical production of space. The issue of the conceptualization of the Madhyadesh is interesting, and she was wondering if there is a geographical expansion of this imagined space or even a transformation in the context of the migration of the Brahmanas during the early medieval period. So that's first part of her question. There is another part, sir.
Uh, that's a fascinating question which fascinated Brahmins because many of the Brahmin commentators who wrote on the Manavadharmashastra were themselves located. Like the most important Dharmashastra commentator was someone called Medhatithi, who wrote a commentary on the Manusmriti. He was located in Kashmir. So he says that I am not located in the Madhyadesh. And since Manu Dharma Shastra said that, a Brahmin should not move out of Madhyadesh. But we find that they are there in Andhra Pradesh, like Kulluk Bhatt, who also wrote a commentary on Manu Dharma Shastra. He was located in Bengal, again not part of Madhya Desh. So they found a variety of justifications, which we need not go into. But this kind of migration did continue, which meant that the idea of Madhya Desh was being stretched. And Medha Tithi, in fact, makes this very interesting statement that if a good king captures a new area and turns the Chandalas into Shudras and establishes the four Varna system, then that area becomes part of Aryavart and Madhyadesh. So this kind of job was being done by a variety of methods, and Brahmins were migrating. There also there were these ideas that if you have a fire ritual being performed, that will automatically turn that place into a pure land. And even from the time of Satavahanas, meaning first, second century AD onwards, you have examples of fire rituals being performed to turn an area into a Brahmanical space as such. So it was very much happening in the historical places.
So, if I may add to Sneha's question, so in a way, for example, a Brahmin living in the Himalayas or in the Himachal region would consider himself to be a lesser Brahmin because he's not living in the Madhya Desh.
There are these rings of purity. So there will be superior Brahmins and inferior Brahmins. We have examples even today that in even every province there will be Brahmin groups or who where there will be some kind of hierarchy. Some Brahmins will be considered superior and other Brahmins will be considered inferior. That's true of not only Brahmins, even of Kshatriyas and Vaishyas. There is some kind of hierarchy that is created as such.
So, sir, in a way, the highest of the Brahmins living in the Himalayas would be equal to the highest of the Brahmins or the most superior or the purest of the Brahmins living in the Madhyadesh, or no, the highest Brahmin in Himalaya would be equivalent to a lower Brahmin in the Madhyadesh? How do the texts look at it?
You see, they are very clear that the Madhyadesh and Brahmavat Brahmins are the best. So no one else can compare with them. They are very clear about it. But what is interesting is that when we look at historical processes, each region has created its own set of Brahmins, and there they have their own hierarchies, which also means that generally in the traditional system, a Brahmin from, say, Bengal wouldn't marry a Brahmin from Uttar Pradesh. The Brahmin from Bengal will marry a Brahmin from Bengal only, or a Brahmin from Tamil Nadu will marry a Brahmin from Tamil Nadu only. They are not coming over. So regions, there it becomes more region specific. But on a pan-Indian scale, these Dharma Shastra texts are very clear that it's the Brahmins of the middle country who are the best. And that's why these Brahmins were migrating to different parts and they were being welcomed in different parts of the country as such.
Thank you, sir. Over to the next question by the audience. Uh, Chandan asks, I'll come to Sneha's question later. Chandan asks, when did caste originate and what was its purpose of origination?
You see, we can look at these issues of origin are always very, very difficult because they are more to do with present day political structures than to do with the past as such. That happens with all questions about origins. You know, when we talk about origins of Aryans, origins of Indus Valley civilization, etc. So the better way of going about it is to look at these texts and see how they are trying to perceive the idea of caste system rather than create a transcendental idea of how caste would have originated and all that. And in the case of, say, Manu, because I'm focusing on Manu, so he is very clear that these are god given things. It was the gods, they all go by, in a certain sense, what was mentioned in the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda, where they say that Purush was divided and Brahmins came from the head of the Purush and the Kshatriyas from his shoulders, etc., etc. So, but we also have to understand that this was one of the ideologies. Caste system per se, how prevalent it was, is we are still unclear about it because I say a king like Ashoka, who was very, very concerned with social spaces and issues that face society, he never mentions the caste system. So, it seems very strange that he doesn't mention it. However, the Buddhist tradition does mention it. So the possibility is that some segments had already accepted the caste system. There are many other segments which had not accepted the caste system.
Thank you very much, sir. Sagnik Saha also thanks you for the lecture and asks, how much of this conceptualized space of Madhyadesh was realized considering the contemporary donative practices in the stupas?
Contemporary, sorry, what practices?
Donative practices in the stupas.
No, as I pointed out in the previous response as such, what we have to see, the question would be whether Manusmriti was like a constitution. No, it was not. It was a set of prescriptions, and probably different parts of the subcontinent will follow some of the things and not follow many of the things, reject them altogether also. And as we know, and as being pointed out, there are also parallel ideological traditions like Buddhism, Jainism, and a whole lot of them who also reject caste systems. However, what is important for us to realize is that in today's world, today's India, caste system seems to be an overwhelming practice. Whereas traditions, which, one of the things that we can ask, and that's very important for us, more equalitarian religious traditions like Sikhism, like Islam, they had great success in areas of Punjab. But by the time they reach the middle this Madhyadesh area, they seem to have been blocked out. Obviously, the traditions here of the Brahmanical traditions were so powerful that they couldn't penetrate these areas as such, or they didn't they were not very successful. So I'm talking in terms of large chunks of history rather than small details that need to be filled up by lot more research by young people like you or people who are asking these questions. That's what is for the future to tell us as such.
Thank you very much, sir. I realized that we had reserved an hour of your time and we are at the top of the hour. Should you allow, can we please use 5 more minutes to, because there are a lot of questions coming in the chat, if you allow. Or
I
we
have
could
no
email the.
issues. I'll be
Okay.
quite happy to respond to questions.
Thank you, sir. So, with regards to the comment that you just made, sir, I was wondering that we see that there is a casteization of Islam and Sikhism, as as is evident in the caste census that we have in India even today. So, was that a response of the Madhyadesh to the new religions or egalitarian religions that were coming in, that they ended up creating a hierarchy within them rather than accepting their egalitarian ideas?
Absolutely. The Madhyadesha traditions, as I said, it kind of, inserts itself into our very genome, as it were, as such. Or the way most of us, the way we greet each other. If you analyze yourself, you realize that this is something that probably I have learned from the Brahmanical tradition. The angle at which you kind of bow, the way that you bow to each other, the words that you use. So it was such a thing that covered every aspect of our persona and personality. So when these traditions emerged, whether the emergence of Islam or emergence of Sikhism and many other Bhakti traditions that emerged, they were in many cases consciously against the caste hierarchy. But we realized that over a period of time, the internalization of the Madhyadesha traditions was so strong that they themselves become caste based. So you have, I don't know, about 700 castes or 900 castes among the Muslims. You have castes among the Sikhs. You have castes among the Christians. All these traditions which were which didn't have any space for caste as far as the religious tradition is concerned. That's a fascinating area which again needs to be explored as such.
Thank you very much, sir. Back to the audience questions. Aju Singh has left a couple of comments. I'll club the question in the comment. He says that Kerala, the caste system in Kerala is not progressive anymore, yet it is considered to be a model by many. Why is it so? And the second question that he's asked is how the subaltern culture has been appropriated by progressive caste people in South India. If you could give your comments on both the questions that he shared.
I'm not very sure I understood the questions properly, but you see, one of the things that's very, very interesting about the caste system is its ability to negotiate with changing economic or political forms of domination. So there has been changes in the forms of domination. We have transited to a democratic form of governance. We had different kinds of political dynasties ruling over us, but the caste systems is able to sustain itself by allying with maybe powerful groups or by being quietly functioning in a almost unseen ways as such. And that's why you have this interesting situation that on the one side, very clearly it has been one of the most oppressive systems that we can imagine, and it keeps billions of people in thrall as such. On the other side of it is also a situation where you find that some of the finest social workers, some of the finest revolutionaries who fought against the caste system were Brahmins themselves. So you have this very interesting situation where Brahmins, being the literati, being also brought up in a ascetic tradition, they also revolt against the caste system, against the system of which they themselves were parts as such. That's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that despite those efforts, the caste system continues to hold the Indian society in its trial, as it were, as such. And we have to keep thinking and rethinking ways in which we can kind of get rid of it as such. But it has now so beautifully joined the political systems of our country that it seems even more difficult now to fight the caste system as such.
Uh, Thank you, sir. So, Sneha's second question is she was wondering if there was a geographical expansion of this imagined space of Madhyadesh, or even a transfer, or how it was conceptualized in non Brahminical traditional sources, the Madhyadesh.
As I pointed out, in a physical geographical sense, the Madhya Desh remains exactly in the area where they say it's the area between the Himalayas and Vindhyas as such. But in a cultural sense, they found a variety of methods through which the Brahmanical tradition, which relates to caste, which relates to rituals, it expands to different parts of the Indian subcontinent, where through fire rituals, fire sacrifices, wherever they go, they establish fires. No, each household was supposed to establish some kind of a fire, and then they read out these mantras where they say, okay, in this and this village, in this and this Janapada, I am doing so and so from such and such kola, I am doing this. This was standard practice. That was one way of expanding the Brahmanical tradition. The other traditions, of course, were the Bhakti traditions of which were related to Ramayana. So there will be repeated recitations of Ramayana, and people who, again, Ramayana was far more open, where they would say that even the women and Shudras can listen to it, and they can be liberated by listening to these Ramayana stories or Mahabharata. So you have any number of performances of Ramayana rituals all over, and that becomes a vehicle for the expansion of the Brahmanical tradition. So while on the one hand they continue to say that okay, Vindhyas, across the Vindhyas is South India, but on the other hand, there are these very, very interesting ways in which the Brahmanical tradition expands itself in East as well as West as well as South as such.
Thank you very much, sir. I realize that we've also gone beyond the extension that we took. So, dear audience, should you have any further questions, please email those to us at karmaheritage@gmail.com, and we will get back to you. We will relay those questions to sir and get back to you with responses at the earliest. Comments keep rolling in, sir. Sania, Lareb, Sophia, Rajneesh, Abu Zafar, they thank you for the incredible lecture. Professor Deshpande also thanks you for the lecture, and Asta also shares her thanks and gratitude from all of us, indeed, sir, for taking out time to talk about your scholarship and for answering our questions in such detail about this. So, thank you very much, sir, for your lecture and for your answers. Dear audience, this brings us to the end of this lecture, and we will be back with our next lecture this Friday at 6 p.m. IST. It's by Dr. Charu Gupta, and the title of her talk is Hindi and Hindu Histories, Caste, Ayurveda, Travel, and Communism in Early 20th Century India. So we'll see you next on 7th March. Till then, please join me in thanking Professor Basant for his time and for his lecture scholarship and for his answers. Thank you so much, sir, for answering my
Thank you.
questions and all our questions on YouTube.
Thank you, Chandni. Thank you, Ishan.